Hi, I'm Chris Jordan, and in the previous video we looked at the BULATS shortlisting question that focuses on charts and trends. In that video we also looked at some language that's important for being able to describe or understand changes in amounts. And that means language is going to be very important for the BULATS exam. What we've looked at so far is good for a basic understanding of a chart or description of a trend. But in this video, we're going to look at what we need to be able to understand if we want to catch more detail. And that's going to be important for some of the more challenging questions in this section of the BULATS test. So if you haven't seen it already, check out our previous video, Charts and Trends 1. Now you might want to watch that first because this video is going to build on what we covered in that. Now before our first question, let's look at some key language. In the previous video, we looked at words that describe a situation or change in a chart. Words such as increase or drop or remain flat. But also important are the words that describe how much or how quickly these changes happen. Let's start by looking at some commonly used words that can be used to describe a slow change or a small amount. So we have a gradual or slight increase, remembering that slight means small and gradual means slow. Next, some words that can mean a reasonable amount, not small but not huge either. Here we can say a significant, substantial or steep rise. And finally, these words are common when talking about a big or fast change. So, a sharp, dramatic, steep or rapid drop. While there are many words to describe this kind of change, these words are among the most common both in the workplace and in the BULATS exam. It's also important to note that these are all adjectives, but they can easily become adverbs simply by adding ly at the end. So instead of this, we can also say productivity increased steadily. Or instead of this, we can say costs fell sharply. Let's have a try. There was a slight rise in exports. The number of visits increased gradually. The amount of debt has grown significantly. It fell gradually in the first half and then dramatically in the second. It fell sharply in the first half before rising gradually in the second. Now let's go ahead and try a BULATS chart question. If you haven't seen the first video in this series, an introduction to the BULATS shortlisting question, you might want to watch that first so that you know how to do the question. So here it goes. Remember, you're going to hear the recording twice. Which chart is correct?
Online hotel bookings dropped a little early in the year, but then they grew steadily in the following months, especially in May. However, there was no growth in June, which is a little worrying because the summer period should be the busiest time of the year for us.
Which chart is correct?
Online hotel bookings dropped a little early in the year, but then they grew steadily in the following months, especially in May. However, there was no growth in June, which is a little worrying because the summer period should be the busiest time of the year for us.
Okay, let's check the script. Can you follow the trend? Okay, so we see bookings were dropping early in the year, but they grew after with more growth in May. And then no growth in June, so this must be the answer. Now, when we're trying to identify the right amount or trend, we may occasionally need to be more precise in order to distinguish between two trends or results that are similar. So let's look a little at some language we often hear in these questions that can be important for identifying the correct amount from two similar points. Now, before we move on, we often need to be clear about when something happens in a time period. For example, did it happen last year, or was it at the beginning or the end of the year? To understand clearly when things happen within a period covered by a chart, make sure you feel comfortable with these. Let's combine the two things we've just looked at so far with a quick practice. Although sales were relatively flat for the first half of the year, they increased in the second to finish at just over 7.5 million by year end. In the second quarter, sales reached a peak of 6 million, but they were down to 4 million by the end of the following quarter. Now we're going to finish with a question that combines many of the things that we've been looking at in this video. Are you ready?
As you can see, profits rose considerably from years 1 to 3, starting at just under £100 million and finishing at well over £200 million. The most significant increase took place during year 2, when the company started on its export program. The third year saw a period of consolidation when growth slowed. However, we are looking forward to greatly improved profits during year 4. As you can see, profits rose considerably from years 1 to 3, starting at just under £100 million and finishing at well over £200 million. The most significant increase took place during year 2, when the company started on its export program. The third year saw a period of consolidation when growth slowed. However, we are looking forward to greatly improved profits during year 4.
Okay, how did you go? Ready to check? So we can see there was a big increase from years 1 to 3, and we also hear that the biggest increase was in year 2. While in year 3, even if we're not so sure what consolidation is, we hear that growth slowed. So it must be this one. Now, before we finish, one very important thing we need to note from this question is that at the end of the recording, you did hear something about improvement. But this good news was about what will happen in year 4. And this is talking about the future, but it's not included in the chart. So don't be confused by this. You need to be careful because it's quite common in these chart questions and many candidates are caught by it. Just remember, we're always listening to answer the question, and in this case the question was, which is the correct chart? And that means we only need to focus on what happened in years 1 to 3. Well, that brings us to the end of this video on chart questions for the BULATS listening test. But remember, if your level is perhaps a little bit higher, you'll be expected to understand both more detail in the chart and also a greater range of language used to express it. We hope you have found this video useful in preparing for this kind of question, or more generally in enhancing your ability to understand or follow a description of a chart or a trend, perhaps in a presentation or maybe in a verbal report. And don't forget, for more help preparing for the BULATS exam, please feel free to check out our other videos in this series. Thank you for watching and good luck with your BULATS chart questions.